celebration. And of course it's a pleasure to be here and it's an honour to be invited to be your host for tonight. So it gives me great pleasure to invite Tricia Lowness to stage for the Welcome to Country, Dorothy Savage, Bindel, and Virginia Wires, of course, Walgurukaba.
Waramuli. Waramuli means welcome in my Birigaba language, and that's the language spoken by the Bindal people. And tonight's a very, very special night. I'd like to acknowledge the Walgurukaba people whom we share this beautiful country with. 40 years of celebration. I'd also like to acknowledge the distinguished guest, my elders past and present, and distinguished guest tonight. For me, it's quite an emotional time for me standing up here because I want to acknowledge the people. 40 years ago, Yumba Meta became an incorporated body, but 5 and 10 years prior to that was the hard sweat and tears of a number of people who sat around tables drinking cups of tea and eating cakes that only Maud used to make and beautiful tarts. So tonight I want to acknowledge Uncle Ernie here, Auntie Eva Kennedy, Auntie Elsie Thompson, and Auntie Fanny Phyllis Nuggins is here. Because they were the people who sat around the table with my mother, Grace Smallwood, and my stepfather, Uncle Norman, when it was just a dream. They were the people who thought about being freedom fighters for our people. They sat at the table and thought about how we should have had our own houses, how we should have had our own organisations, health, legal aid and housing. And I'd like to read out the names of all those that were on the first board if I can. Uncle Ernie Houlihan, Auntie Maud Houlihan, deceased, Nicey Sambo, deceased, Evelyn Illen, deceased, Elsie Thompson, Phyllis Nuggins, Garnet Nuggins, deceased, Norman Brown, Daphne Lambton, Flora Houlihan, Grace Smallwood, deceased, Eva Kennedy, Margaret Smallwood, Reggie Matthews, deceased. And, you know, I look today at, in 40 years ago, I was a young mum myself and I had 4 children, I think. But I remember signing petitions. I remember my mum and Auntie Morty pushing prams and having those babies, their younger children, at these meetings that they had. And who would believe today, and I'm sure their spirits will be with us all here tonight, to see the outcome. The administration and the boards of directors over those 40 years, the amount of work you must have put in. To the current board, I congratulate you. Janine, you head today's board.
I go Nabal Naval, that's hello and welcome in Walgurukaba language. Also like to acknowledge the Bindal traditional owners who also share country with us. Townsville we acknowledge as Gurrumbulbara in our language. We belong to Townsville and Magnetic Island, and Magnetic Island we call Yumba. I'd like to start with Uncle Ernie Houlihan, acknowledging him and all the hard work that you've done over the years. Just an extension of what Auntie Dorrie May had said earlier, to all our elders that had sat around and having that cup of tea or cup of coffee, like Kev Carmody, one of our brothers that sings there, from little things, big things grow, and Yumba Meta has surely proved that over the 40 years that they've been in service to our community. As we all know, it's imperative that with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and whether it be housing, health, or anything else that to do with our people, you know, there needs to be a holistic approach. And I think the work that Yumba Meta has done over those years has done that in a holistic approach way in dealing with the issues that we need on a cultural level to deal with housing issues and homelessness issues for our people. And they've just gone from strength to strength over those years. I'd also like to acknowledge Janine Gertz, who's the current chair of Yumba Meta, because it's the next generation also that's going to take it forward for our future generations. And you know, she's well equipped also with the work that not only the Gertz and Houlihan families, but the Kennedy families, Thompson families, and many other families. I'd like to also acknowledge Auntie Donna Bobbitt over there, and Auntie Phyllis Nuggins, and many more, and Auntie Eva Kennedy. Without those elders that showed that insight to fight for what we got, we wouldn't have what we have today. I'd also like to acknowledge former MP that's in the House, Mr Peter Lindsay, also David Crisafulli. I thank you for spending your time to be here with us. And I've also got my lovely Father McPeters. All our Murray community know we love Father McPeters. He's been initiated in our communities a long time ago. You know, Gary, I'll say, Chamberlain, thank you for spending your time here. And that's what makes a community, everyone from different areas come together to make it work.
I think it's really important for me to point out that Yumba Meta wouldn't have happened without two other really important things happening in history preceding its establishment. That's the 1967 referendum called by the whole government, and the election and term of government under the leadership of the Prime Minister Gough Whitlam. The 1967 referendum and constitutional amendments allowed the federal government to make special laws with regard to Aboriginal Australians, and it was the Whitlam government who used its constitutional powers to overrule, at the time, racially discriminatory state legislation. In 1973, the Whitlam government launched a policy called the Australian Assistance Plan, which was designed to provide support to grassroots organisations delivering services, social services to our community. These two major events in our history allowed our local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community to bypass the Joh Bjelke-Petersen state government to obtain funding to improve services of Aboriginal people in our community. Our community took advantage of those changes, and the result is Yumba Meta. I've officially been a part of the organisation for 4 years, but Yumba Meta has always been familiar to me. Many members in my family have been involved in Yumba Meta's journey. Uncles, aunts, cousins, grandparents. I have many memories of conversations and the buzz surrounding Yumba Meta from way back when I was a little girl. 40 years ago, Yumba Meta started out with 8 houses, and today we have 146 houses, employs 70 plus staff. We have programs that provide short to medium term accommodation support and long-term housing. And it took the foresight of our elders and founding board members to take the plunge in setting up the organisation for our community. From what I've been told and what from Auntie Dorothy alluded to before, it wasn't an easy road. And I sincerely thank and honour the founding board members, because without them, Yumba Meta would not have existed. To the dedication and service of the Yumba Meta staff in delivering outcomes to our community over the 40 years of our history, you've made Yumba Meta into what it is today. To Yumba Meta staff, please know that your service and contribution to our community is much appreciated. I sincerely hope that your employment and service to our community gives you a sense of achievement and pride to know that your contribution to our community's well-being is to those that really need it. So happy birthday, Yumba Meta. I'm going to say 40 years young, because the current board has a vision for Yumba Meta that will make sure that we're around for many more years to come for community service. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Janine Gertz, President of Yumba Meta. I'd like to now call up the Minister for Local Government, the Honourable David Crisafulli.
Fellas, if you think she looks good from back there, you should see her up close. See what we would do. Tell you what, if my wife wasn't one of those ladies who put her hand up to say she was happily married, Mary G. Woo-hoo. Ladies and gentlemen, like everyone in this room, I believe in Yumba Meta. And I believe in it because the model is right. It's right because it has Indigenous people controlling their own destiny and looking after their own people. But it's also right because of the people who are involved. Madam President, thank you for your address. You indeed have big shoes to fill. If I've met a better person in Townsville than Ernie Houlihan, it's not springing to mind at the moment. You are indeed a legend. To your CEO, Dushi, it has been my pleasure working with you. From a young councillor, I had an issue in the early days of my time on council. I will never forget how your organisation dealt with that. The respect it showed the community, the respect it showed the people who were in the dwelling. It is a model that we could learn so much from. So where to for the future? I've had the great honour to speak in Parliament many times about Yumba Meta, and every time there's something that looks like housing, I take the opportunity to sing your praises. The last time was in the last sitting of Parliament, when we changed legislation to enable the transfer to happen from the government providers more so to the private sector. And that is where you come in. I sincerely believe that your model is one that we can replicate across the state, because it is the best I have seen, and we can learn so much from it. And in closing, I have a challenge for all of you. Success will not be defined in 40 years by Yumba Meta being alive as an organisation. That would be just treading water. Success would be an organisation that currently helps a few hundred Indigenous people at any one time to many, many thousands. Yumba Meta, happy 40th birthday. You are indeed a great institution.
I said I'd have a speech for tonight, so about 3 hours ago I wrote one. It says, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be able to stand here tonight and give a history after 40 years involvement of the Yumba Meta Housing Association. When Whitlam came to power and said that Aboriginal people could get money direct from the Commonwealth if they formed companies and cooperatives, Gordon Ryan, the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, said he only wanted one housing association in each district. You can imagine that there was a race on by 4 groups that I know of who wanted to be the first. And if they got registered first, they would get the money. Because I was on the board of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Legal Service, Yumba Meta got registered first. In fact, it was the first in Queensland. Because I had registered the first housing company in Queensland, I was invited to Ayr, Ingham, Charters Towers and Newman to help them set up. Here in Townsville, it wasn't all plain sailing, as there were a lot of sceptics. Some didn't believe that we would get any money from the 4 houses. And when we did finally put in submissions to the department here in Townsville, we often got to run around because there were submissions were lost or misplaced or something like that. So in the end, Norman Brown and I decided to fly direct to Canberra to get the houses, take the submission down there. We went down and submitted for 10, but we only got 8. That was the first 8 houses. In the space of 2 years, later on we got 5 more. A while later we got another 10, and then another 10 later on. In the space of 2 years, our houses, we have 33 homes, more than anything else. Permanent housing stabilises families. One of the great achievements was to build 16 units at Birrigan for retired persons. This came after a long battle. I'd like to pay tribute to 2 women in my life, my wife and my mother. My wife, who rounded up members so we could get the company registered. My mother, who assisted financially in those early days. There are several politicians who helped, but I would especially like to mention Lindy Nelson Carr, as she arranged phone link-ups when we were being stalled with submissions. Last but not least, I'd like to thank 2 other persons who are responsible for getting Yumba Meta to where it is today. They are Bob Burton, who has been our project manager for a number of years, and Dushi Thangai, who's been our CEO for a number of years. Bob hardly gets mentioned in these dues, but he battled for us against all the contractors and everything, and he's done a great job for Yumba Meta. Dushi, I know she doesn't like to be mentioned, but she has been the driving force behind Yumba Meta's success. With all these fine people helping, Yumba Meta could do nothing else but succeed. I only hope that my contribution helped in some way.
My name is Eva Kennedy. I am the Vice President of Yumba Meta Housing Association Limited. I am from the Kutchula Clan group from Charters Towers. I acknowledge the Bindal and Walgurukaba people who are the traditional owners of the country that we stand on this evening in celebrating 40 years of the operation of Yumba Meta Housing Association Limited. I give my respects to the elders, both past and present, for it is the elders who have or hold the memories, traditions and the hope of Aboriginal Australia. I would like to note the passing of Mr Gough Whitlam, past Prime Minister of Australia. He did a lot for Indigenous rights in this country. Yumba Meta Housing Association Limited may not be where it is today only for the late Mr Gough Whitlam. I welcome the elders, ladies and gentlemen, to this 40-year celebration of the operation of Yumba Meta Housing Association Limited. First up, I would like to give recognition to a man, Dr. Ernie Houlihan, who was, with the support of others, was the driving force behind the dream of better housing for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and bringing it forward to reality. Like many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations, Yumba Meta Housing Association Limited began operations from very small beginnings. As the organisation was not in a financial situation to rent an office, its business was conducted out of the boot of a car, my car, until the organisation's housing stock could be expanded and the organisation's income increased. Monthly meetings were held at the director's home until the organisation could afford to rent an office. Throughout the 40 years, Yumba Meta Housing Association has developed into shining light for Indigenous housing. The organisation manages the Reverend Charles Harris Diversionary Centre, Breaking the Cycle, Flora House, Dale Parker for Men, Dale Parker for Women, and Ernest and Maud Houlihan Elders Village. The future project is for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander home ownership from homeless to home ownership, with land purchased in Mount Louisa for 36 houses to be built and will be offered to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to purchase to enable the people to become homeowners. This will give the people the opportunity to develop a more stable lifestyle. Over time, the strength of the organisation has come from local people who have wanted to do something for their community. From developing Yumba Meta Housing Association Limited's logo, which was designed by Darren Kennedy, to the previous presidents of the organisation, Ernie Houlihan, Norman Brown, Josephine Saylor, David Smallwood, the late George Alley, Jennifer Savage, Rachel Atkinson and the late Eddie Maber, the late David Alley, Daphne Lambton, Richard Houlihan and the late Bradwin Wilson, and yours truly. After all these years from the struggle in the beginning to now, one of our initial board members, Elsie Thompson, still maintains involvement with Yumba Meta Association Limited and continues to support the aims and goals of the organisation. Dorothy Erickson, who for approximately 7 years worked as the administrator of Yumba Meta Housing Association and went on and became a board of director for 17 years. To date, current board members, Janine Gertz, President, Dawn Charter as Secretary, Janine Goodwin-Thompson, Treasurer, Michelle Southwell, Donna Bobbitt, Helen Bushman, Jen Burns, Ernie Houlihan, Gary Chamberlain, as well as myself. Many thanks must go to Tracy Raturia, our minute-taker. I would like to thank Lindy Nelson-Carr for all her support when in office, as this helped in the progress of Yumba Meta Housing Association Limited. The organisation has gone from strength to strength under the watchful eye of the Board of Directors, and at this point I must acknowledge the CEO of Yumba Meta Housing Association Limited, Dushi Thangaya, with her burning desire to take the organisation forward and get me up here on the stage. With the support of staff, has developed Yumba Meta Housing Association Limited to where it is at today, with 146 houses, with over 75 employees. Dushi, I thank you for your commitment and compassion. Please enjoy the evening. Thank you.
What our elders have demonstrated, the establishment of these organisations, they've certainly fought hard for. And as Ali Eve and Uncle Ernie has explained to us in their presentation, it's been a real battle. For us now as a generation running these organisations, the challenge for us is to maintain and to grow and to build and to meet the growing needs of our population. I come from a health background, and often when we talk about addressing health services, one of the fundamental things is addressing accommodation and housing, making sure that people have safe, affordable housing and a roof over their head. So I congratulate the work that Yumba Meta is doing in that area to ensure that people have a safe environment and a comfortable and affordable place to live in. We've come this far. It's 40 years. Myself and current chairperson of Yumba Meta, Janine Gertz, who's I was going to say we're the same age, but we're in that 30 to 50 range. But we're the generation now, I guess, to really step up to the mark, and I know there's many of you out there. But the important thing in terms of boards and our governance and how we move forward is having diversity. And so I use this opportunity to really encourage people to step up to the plate and step up to the mark. Because when we have diversity on the board, we have diversity in thinking, and you realise that the organisation grows. And Yumba Meta has certainly demonstrated that.
May God bless each and every one of you tonight, each and every one gathered here. All of us, as we know now, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, we all recognise each other as just the one family here. And we pray that all of us, as you, the Indigenous people, have your emphasis on relationship and respect for each other, that all of us may grasp that kind of feeling in our lives, so that all of us can be one people respecting one another.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Someone must feel like a fool tonight, knowing they let you go.
Be heroes, young and old. We can all be heroes, every boy and every girl. We can all be heroes if we believe in ourselves. We can all be heroes.
I think it's been a lovely night that we've been able to celebrate like this with the whole of the community, and so honoured that so many elders, community members, supporters, partners of Yumba Meta have turned up tonight to help us celebrate.
40 years down the track, I've seen all the wonderful fruits that Yumba Meta has laid the foundation, and from a lot of our people that couldn't get houses, and that's because we weren't citizens until 1967 from the referendum, and so many of our people were homeless. So you're asking me about what I feel about tonight. It's incredibly significant in terms of seeing their growth. From little things, big things grew.
What I've really enjoyed about tonight is that it's really been centred about our future. The way that the Indigenous community is coming together. My birthday wish for Yumba Meta is that we have many, many more years that have been just as successful as the last 40, and hopefully 140 more.